Geology, geology, geology. This is Daniel Minizini, your inquisitive geology, and this is Mini Geology Show, where we put in connection our beloved discipline of geology with society at large. And today we have one of the largest society of geoscience, the Geological Society of America, founded in the leap year of 1888. GSA is a scientific society with more than 22,000 members and is present in more than 100 countries. With us today, the president of the Geological Society of America, Donald Siegel. Don, you derive your ideas, your style, and taste from a broad and diverse range of sources. The music, cuisine, literature, you are a writer also, not necessarily scientific literature, politics. I would describe you as an eclectic. How would you describe yourself, Don?
Oh, my attention disappears after a while when I do one thing alone, I guess. And so I just like trying to do different things, and you're right, everything draws on everything else. I do consulting as well, and once recently in a deposition, the opposing attorney asked me if I thought my science was like cooking, and I said, "Excuse me?" And he says, "Is it not true that on a television show you once said cooking is like how you do science? It's similar." And it surprised me, but in fact I did say that once on television, that it's still part of it is empirical, part of it's trial and error, part of it's theory, and I draw that into everything. Yeah.
And you also said that you describe yourself as a type A personality. Why?
Well, this is a source of frustration for some of my family, is that when I get interested in something, I want to develop the skill in it sufficient to be able to make a contribution in it within whatever it is, whether it's playing chess or cooking or playing the guitar. I don't like being a dilettante. I like to actually develop the skill set, which involves, of course, a lot of work and a lot of practice. But I get a lot of pleasure out of doing it. And so in that sense, I have this type A personality. The guitar stuff started about 10 years ago on a bet from a jazz musician at my son's wedding that I couldn't achieve proficiency to play in Boston at his jazz club. And so I took the bet, so here I am.
and this is your character since you were a kid, or you changed while you were growing up?
Yeah, I changed. Although when I was a kid, I liked the arts as much as I liked science. But my father had the wisdom to tell me, this is back in the late 1950s, mid 1960s when I was in high school, that you can, if you want to become an artist, in those days, rock and roll, folk music, whatever, if you wanted to do that, it's still going to be a very difficult road to go down, because it's still luck and there's so many people in there. But if you become a scientist, you always can have a job, and you can do the music and the arts on the side. But to be a successful scientist, I found I did very little of the art on the side. I was just too busy teaching and research and writing papers and all the other stuff you do to be successful in academia and in the oil industry before that, in the USGS. I mean, I had 3 big jobs. So I never really got into the arts until I was, a few years before retirement. And when this jazz guy said, "Hey, why don't you, here's a challenge for you." And so I said, "Wow." And so then I got back into it, and then that led to going into writing fiction and other stuff. So in the last however many years I have, along with GSA and some consulting and a few lectures here and there, the arts are going to be my passion. Yeah.
Didn't you read the words of your father like a challenge? you listened to him, but that could have been a challenge. You
Oh,
would have said, "Oh no,
oh,
no,
what?
I'm gonna be a very good artist."
Yeah. No, he took it as a, I mean, I was an okay, I mean, I was okay student. I wasn't great. You know, I told my own students that, you know, I was a B student all the way through my academic career. You know, even when I was doing my doctorate, when everybody gets A's, you know, if you have any brains at all, you know, and I was getting B's. And a lot of that was that if I wasn't interested in a particular class, I'd kind of blow it off. And I'd really spend time in the classes that were really hard for me. And so the ones that were easy, I'd get a B in, and the ones that were really hard for me, I'd get a B in. But the amount of effort that I would do for both would be different. And it was just my work ethic that got me where I am. You know, I think I have some smarts, but there's a lot of people who can out math me and out chemistry me and out geology me. But you know, I think the work ethic is what, once I set my mind to do something, I just put the hours in and I develop a level of competency that gets me through it.
Um, Donald Siegel, you're the president of the Geological Society of America. What kind of president are you?
Well, a little frustrated right now because we've been hijacked by this terrible virus. I'm a pretty good face for the organization. I think I can express its values well, and I'm really proud to be the president of it. I enjoy it immensely. When I go to meetings, now virtual, but even before, what was usual is that there were very few egos on parade, and everybody had the same mission, and they all focused on getting the missions done properly. What should the society bring to its membership, and how can we advance geology? And there wasn't the usual petty fighting for the least amount of resources that I found in academia. And so I find it as a group of people a very pleasant work environment when I go to Denver to meetings. And I like to think I'm an accessible president. You know, we have an executive director with a big staff, and they run the day-by-day operations. So I'm sort of the philosophical head, I guess, at this point.
Dan, do you feel that also being in this position of president of GSA, you also want to do your best and do your homework like you are doing with, or like you did with the guitar and the chess and the writing? So are you like training, or did you train to become one of the best presidents?
Well, GSA does have a training program, but it's not extensive. In other words, to be president, you have to have had some experience with GSA to be on their council, for example, of leadership. And then I was the counselor and the chairman of the publications arm for a while, and I edited the books for GSA. And so, and then in my own division, the hydrogeology division, I was the chairman of the division. So I had that kind of experience, and I was chairman of my department at Syracuse University. So I had broad managerial experience. But I had to do a lot of homework and still have to do understand the details of an organization like this. So it's work, you know, I spend time on it, yeah.
Is it possible to become president of the GSA without a previous experience within the GSA, like it happened for the presidency of the United States of America, when we have a president that didn't really go through the typical path where you have to be governor or senator or anything like that? Could it be possible for an outsider to become president of GSA?
No, I don't think so. I mean, traditionally, we look for leaders. Well, there's two, in all these organizations, American Geophysical Union, GSA, we have the staff and the executive director, or whatever the title would be, who actually runs the organization. Some of the organizations, AGU recently selected someone who had no geology or earth science background at all. I forget her name, but she had other experience in another field as being a business person manager. But the council that runs it and the president and all those are always part of the discipline. So, the analogy would be, not exact analogy, but at a university, you have the president of the university and the board of trustees who are then his boss. Okay, and then you have a vice president who usually, or a chancellor who manages the day-to-day operations. So I'm kind of like the president, like a university president who kind of helps with the philosophy of where the organization goes. The vice chancellor would be our executive director, Vicki McConnell, who actually manages what's going on. And then the board of directors, the trustees, would be our council that provides the guidance of what we're going to do next. So it's kind of, I don't know if I made that clear, but it's segmented that way. So my position, I was only 1 year, so there's only so much I can do. So I have a year before as the president-elect, then president, then past president. So it's a 3-year term, and my responsibilities change as we go through it. So we have a new president-elect now who's coming in July. So there's only so much that I could do to move an organization. Yeah.
So there are certainly a lot of cons of being a president just for 1 or 2 years. But within that year or 2 years, you are bringing, as you said, a philosophical point of view. I bet you read philosophy since you are so eclectic. Which kind of philosopher would you be? Which kind of branch of the philosophy would you apply to a geological society that is global, that has so many people, one of the largest, that has to communicate with policymakers, with students, professors, professionals?
Wow, that's a great question. What philosophy I would take?
Like looking from the European point of view, we would say you are a pragmatist, utilitarianist, or
I see. I would be very much a pragmatist. That's a good one. You picked it up, because I think we have to adjust all the time to new circumstances. This circumstance that we have now with this virus, and how we're communicating at this moment, I think will change the way dramatically how business is done, how societies are run, how conferences will be run, and we don't know how it's going to evolve. But I do know I bought some stock in Zoom, which is now a verb, to Zoom something, just like Google. I'm going to Google something, and I think that this is going to change things. And so as a pragmatist, but a realist as well, I'm pushing the society, and fortunately the president-elect, the new person, Doug Walker from Kansas, has the same views, that we want to move us more to this direction. So we'll still remain, competitive, and also, relevant to earth sciences.
When you say competitive, you mean competitive against whom?
Well, I shouldn't say competitive. That's a wrong term. I guess, there are lots of societies that people can join. I like to think that GSA is certainly one of the finest that one could join, because it offers lots of opportunities, particularly for junior people who are building their careers and students that I think other societies may not be as focused on. I'm not going to name names. And plus we have the obvious publication arm. Now, one of the things that you said what I'd like to do as president, one of my goals was to try to bring in more applications into the society. That is, we have a strong arm of people who spend time looking at curiosity-driven or basic science issues, which are very important, and I did my career doing this. But we would like to embrace also a lot more of the application side, and bring them into the fold, because they can offer us ways of looking at earth science that basic science people sometimes can't. And this particularly in light of climate disruption that's coming down the pike, and even the vectors and how that might have actually evolved may ultimately have something to do with climate too. So that's my long-term goal. I couldn't do it this year, but because of the virus kind of has changed everything out. No one wants to, they're just trying to keep their operations going. But when I'm past president, I'm going to be spending a lot of time trying to bring industry to become more involved with GSA.
In which way are you going to try to involve more industry, being more specific?
Sure. Well, there's lots of opportunities. Surely offering continuing education credits would be one way of doing it through GSA, either at meetings or through another platform, offering a symposium that relate to the most current and seminal topics in the various applications world. So my field is in hydrogeology, and I've done a lot of work in contaminant work. So, it would be great to have sessions at GSA dealing with the most current kinds of contamination that people are concerned with. And there was one at the Northeast GSA a couple of years ago in Portland, Maine, and it was packed with people. I mean, that was one of the most popular sessions, and that kind of, to me, is a no-brainer that this could be useful both for industry to present what they're doing, and for people coming to the conference to see what's being done outside their niches in academia.
And is GSA ready to accept the implications of bringing industry on the society in a more heavier way? Because industry is naturally for industry to try to lead, to try to drift away the goals of a society like GSA. Are you ready for that?
Well, I think we're ready for it, but I think the goals are mutual. I mean, I think, industry, there's two different cultures. Obviously, academic culture in many places is quite different than in industry. I worked at Emirata Hess, and I've been a consultant my entire career, and so I know what industry is about. But the president before me was Robbie Geis, who owned her own oil company. She was one of the most successful women, maybe the most successful woman in the history of the oil industry. She's written about, the women in the oil industry, and she went in and was very successful when women were not that common. And so Robbie was the past president, and then we have on our council a couple who have either own consulting firms or are part of consulting firms, and we're trying to attract more. And so we've already brought in quite a bit of industry, and at least industrial input. It hasn't quite yet translated enough, in my opinion, to things such as the offerings at conferences and Penrose meetings and things like that. In the field course offerings at conferences, there's more applications, but that's a no-brainer. It's the kind of thing where you offer a technique. But I'd like to see more intellectual exchange than we have now, but we're moving toward it. And I don't think people realize how far we've gone from, say, 20 years ago.
In which sense?
Pretty much all. Well, having more viewpoints and more diversity across the board. And,
because previously was more focused on academia?
Academia, yeah, academic. And I mean, when I first joined, gosh, it must have been, I dare say, I don't think it's 50 years ago. It was a long time ago. And you go to these meetings and it'd be almost all men and all men. And now that's changed. It's completely diverse. And at the meetings, there's still, in my opinion, not enough component of industry, of applications. And it's difficult. they're two different cultures, right? In industry, there's not as much of a push to go out and disseminate information that you may have come up with. And, in the oil industry, of course, that's confidential and all that. And so there's that cultural difference. Academia, you have to go to conferences to get the cachet, to get your promotions and your jobs. So and you go to industrial conference like AAPG, I've gone to that, and that's fine. I enjoy it, but it's a very different feeling to it. It's much more commercial in a sense. But I think that there is commonality. There's bridges that could be made between the two. And obviously,
what is the main bridge?
Well, the main bridge from the academic sense would be industry learning of new techniques and new methodologies that could be applied to whatever application that they're doing, whether it's environmental or extractive industries. From the industry side, it's of course the talent pool of young people who they can interact with, from whom they can hire. I remember, I'm a hydrogeologist, but I bet a third of my students went into the oil and gas industry. And the industry was interested in really smart people who were trained very well in the basics. And they were less interested whether the student did contaminant studies or wetland studies or water extraction studies, whatever the thesis was. They were interested in how they thought. And so some of my students have done very well in oil and gas. And so, I think that's what the industry could get from.
And you mentioned that one of the bridges is about tools that university can provide, because universities or academia researchers, they study new ways to understand the complicated geological systems. Since the research labs in the major oil companies and in the also obviously smaller companies that are disappearing, and universities, they really rely on funding from industry. They create more and more consortia. What is your personal opinion on where is today the pure research?
Well, nowhere. A lot of people think, for example, that NSF research is pure research. But the reality is that academic researchers will go where the money is. And then wherever the money is, they'll kind of try to finesse whatever that research thrust is into what they might be interested in. So, for example, I was interested in wetland ecology for a while and how wetland vegetation evolved through geologic time. And so I had a pretty good program going, and then suddenly the money dried up for that. And what became interested, NSF became interested, and Department of Energy became interested in, was methane generated in wetlands. Well, I didn't know anything about methane in wetlands, but I said, well, that's where the money is. So I quickly said, okay, we're going to look at methane in wetlands, and if we can take a small chunk of that and figure out the ecology we're interested in, then that'll be great. And so academic research goes whichever direction NSF wants it to go, and in a sense that pulls it, whether that's what the professors really wanted or not. Big data. Now, if I were in academia doing research, I'd have to be looking at big data, because that's where the large scale funding is, whether I thought that was the best way of looking at data or not. But I have to find some way to work with it. And then at the end of my career, I was working with a data set from Chesapeake Gas looking at fracking issues. And, I was accused that I was using, bad data provided by Chesapeake, which is absurd, because it was all collected independently of them, and that I was in bed with Chesapeake and all this horrible stuff. And I came, and I've seen this same data set used by pure academic researchers at Penn State, and we came up with new science. Some of it, was kind of interesting. So I think in the earth sciences, it's not quite like in the medical field, where I think there may be, from what I see, at least anecdotally, the pulling can really lead to some bad results, but in earth sciences, I think it's a little more balanced, but there's nothing that's pure. I mean, unless you have some sugar daddy who's paying you, out of the goodness of their heart to do whatever you want to do without any, like in the old days.
It has always been like that, or this is something new, that there is no place for basic research in geoscience?
Well, there's basic research done, but it's all driven, of course, by the what I'm saying is that even NSF has an agenda on what they want people to study. And so they have various programs, and you have to fit, as an academic, your research into whatever programs are out there from which you can get money.
Who decides
and
that?
So at NSF, they have groups of people they've hired on staff who are very bright, and they look at what they think the direction should be, and then politics plays in a role into it as well. For example, if there were a giant hurricane, a Class 5 hurricane, to strike Atlanta, Georgia, or Washington, D.C., or Charleston next year, and just lay waste to it, I suspect there very well could be funding suddenly coming up to, hey, let's look at meteorology a little differently to try to predict this better, or let's find ways through the engineering branch of NSF to buttress the coast or whatever, find an adaptation. I think so. There's politics in everything. There's no such thing as pure, unadulterated research that's pure curiosity driven. Academics may think there is, but they always have to understand that they have to go and find the money, and wherever they find it, they have to abide by what the interest of the funder is. Like
do you think that this is a model that is valid or is true for the entire world, or you are talking mainly about US and North America?
That's hard to say. I think it's probably most everywhere, because people in governments just don't hand out and say, just here, use it. Here's $100,000 and do whatever you want. Now, Canada had a model like that for a while through their program called NSERC, where every faculty member in science would get a small pot of money every year to do with whatever they wanted. It wasn't even attached to a program, and it funded a student or two. And as long as they produced papers and were showing to be active, they got this continuous amount of small-scale research money, and they could just do whatever they wanted. But elsewhere, I think in Germany, I can't imagine Germany or Switzerland. I'm thinking China, of course, the government controls everything, and they tell them what to do and what they should be studying. Australia is quite applied. They're way ahead in terms of looking at climate disruption, in terms of adaptation.
Dan, I know that you are a president of a Geological Society, which is part of the system. But you personally, do you think that this is the right modus operandi? Do you think that this is the perfect way to do it, or is a compromise?
I think this is a reasonable blend. It's worked. Certainly, for example, in the earth sciences, it's worked. I mean, it funded research that came up with plate tectonics. It's funded this research that's created in my discipline, in hydrogeology, a great deal of advances. And I know in other fields as well. I think it works fine. It's just that people shouldn't think that it is completely unfettered. There's always some sort of politics involved. And but I'm not saying the politics is bad. I don't, in the sense of NSF research, I've never in my career ever been told I have to spin it one way or another. And in the applications world, if you're funded, occasionally that could happen where there's just some pressure to try to spin the results according to what the funder would like to see, much like in the pharmaceutical industry. If they're paying someone to test a drug, I've heard enough cases where you see the results that would be nice for the company, even though they're presented in a way that would be where if they're presented differently, it might not be as quite so advantageous. But I think it works well. Here's an anecdote. I have a colleague who is Chinese, and he was extremely smart. He's worked and he's been tried to be recruited by Chinese institutions, and offered all sorts to go back to China. And I asked him one day when he got a particularly good offer, why don't you go back? He says, well, here at least it's competitive, and it's a reasonably competitive and honest system. Sometimes people can play around the edges, but you write a proposal, it goes in the pool, and then there's competition. And he says in China it's all about who you know. And if you know somebody who has a lot of influence, and as long as you're in good terms, you can do extremely well. But if something fractures that relationship, then it's not as good, and that's really hard to get funding. So he says, I'd much rather compete in a situation, even if the odds are pretty long sometimes to get funded, at least it's an honest, upright system. And that's the strength of America's basic research system. Where it moves in terms of fundamental directions, it deals with, what society wants. No one's looking at, for example, ecology the way that they looked at it before, where they go out and count trees and do all that stuff. And what they do is now recombinant DNA, and new technology came in, and that pretty much ended that whole area of research. Same thing with paleoecology. Very few people are going out and just looking at fossils and coming up with assemblages and doing statistics on it. Now they're going into isotopic homologs and all sorts of fancy geochemistry to try to figure out what's going on. So as technology advances, NSF picks up on it and decides to very calmly to play to the technology and see what it can do, hence big data now. We've got the technology, and boy, you see it really being used with COVID now. Crowdsourcing even. It's pretty neat. It's pretty neat what's happening with that.
Dan, if you were a doctor and the GSA, the Geological Society of America, was a patient, how would you describe its status, the health of GSA?
Wow, that's a great. You have good questions, man. Its health. I think overall its health is pretty good. I would say that, like me, it's a little aged, and it
mature.
It's mature. It's mature, and it needs a bit of reinventing, and we're trying to do that through our strategic planning and through our diversity initiatives to bring in younger people and from different backgrounds, and bringing in industry and try to spread out the knowledge and learn from each other. And so we're doing fine. I think as a society, we're doing well. We could do a whole lot better, and a rejuvenation shot. We're in the process of coming up with what the serum will be, but we haven't quite figured it out yet. But I think we're on the way.
Dan, do you think? Do you have in your mind a specific association or society, not necessarily related to geoscience, that you look at like a role model, something that you would like to become like that, something to move towards, something that is a North Star?
Well, the ones I'm familiar with, obviously, are in the earth sciences. I've not been a member of others. Um, and each society has a different role. Like I go to AAAS meetings, and I find those are really interesting, American Association of Advancement of Science, because they cover a huge array of topics. So I'll hear sociology talks or psych talks, engineering talks, earth science talks, but that's very broad. But that's kind of it's fun to go to something like that. That's so broad. To be honest, and this is going to sound weird. I'm not promoting it. I'm not patting the society in the back. I think GSA is the best of the best. And for a lot of reasons. I think it's the right size. It's not so large that you in the shuffle in an enormous society. It's got a lot of breadth across it through the geosciences. I think it could use some more breadth, and there could be some reconfiguration in the future. It's very diverse, and it's a family, And I think that one of the things in our strategic planning that we found when we interviewed people is that folks like to go to GSA meetings. They feel like they're coming home. They meet people they've known their whole careers. They renew relationships, and through it all, they get a serendipity effect where they learn new research initiatives and thrusts. And I don't get that when I go to other meetings as much. Sometimes the meetings are just so huge, and I'm not going to mention names, that I just get lost. There's just so many people that, it's hard to connect unless you make appointments. I just love going to GSA meetings. And I hope the virtual evolution doesn't affect that. The person-to-person contact over a beer or a bottle of whiskey or a glass of whiskey, it's just wonderful. Next time I come to Houston, I'm looking you up, and we'll do that. And that really, to me, makes GSA special. It's the sessions are great, but all the university receptions and then and just the partying of a kind, is I don't find that, and the non-pretentiousness of it is it's just really, even when you go in the exhibition hall, it's different than if you go into other exhibition halls, and I can't even put my finger on it. It's just an ambiance.
It's very nice listening to you talking about the GSA with such a passion. Thank you, Don. Sure. I read in your strategic plan that GSA must adapt to the changing needs of our members and carefully prioritize programs and services in order to remain relevant and sustainable well into the future. Mm-hmm. Can you describe the changing needs of the members?
Well, it's an evolving thing, and we're trying to still get our handle on it. Clearly, we're doing it right now. The millennial, if that's the right word for them, the younger members definitely desire different things than older members. Even things such as they want to make a difference sooner in their careers rather than wait a long time before given that opportunity. So that, of course, is a double-edged sword. When you've had a significant experience, you have the talent to be able to, or experience to make difference. When you're younger and don't have a lot of experience, sometimes you don't see opportunities when they come up. At the same time, though, younger people can bring some idealism and some passion and energy that older people can't.
This changing needs of the members is more about a change in the method of how the Geological Society is run, or is a change in the concepts, on the pillars that they on which the society is based?
No, I think the pillars will remain the same. I mean, our mission statement has 5 of them, and those pillars remain the same. That's the structure, the foundation. It's how you go at those and how you address the function of the society within each of them that needs to be addressed. So, for example, we want to put out great publications, which I think we do. Well, it could be in the future the very way that publication is done will change very dramatically. Here's an example. Right now, my consulting partner told me this. I've not checked it independently. But because the COVID is so serious that apparently the medical journals are publishing unreviewed stuff out. As soon as something is presented that looks halfway decent, the editors will allow it to be published without the traditional peer review because they want to get it out right now if it can lead to a successful therapy and right now. And this is a very different way of publishing, right? And one could see that societies may have to think a little more about this, of having a more open publishing format where something goes out. We're doing it already at GSA a bit, as is AGU, but where a pre-publication document goes out and then people can comment to it. And then all these comments go back and forth, and eventually it's all put together and published. A much more of an interactive kind of thing. Publications may in the future be virtual in some kind. So, for example, instead of publishing a paper, you publish an abstract and give a talk with videos and so forth in it, as opposed to the print media. And I think all these new technologies, I'm convinced, are going to come down the pike very quickly as bandwidth gets bigger and bigger. And I think the younger scientists, the evolving scientists across the board will want to use these approaches as opposed to the older way of submitting a manuscript and going through the reviews and editing the review and going back and forth. I think there's going to be a much more streamlined process, and we have to find a way to do it while maintaining scientific credibility and strength. And so almost every part of our mission deals with these kinds of changes, and a lot's driven by how society is changing, how our conferences are put together. I mean, the whole thing, and we're reviewing all this continually now, trying to get a better handle on it.
I see, and I read that then you write that the adaptation, it is that in order to remain relevant and sustainable well into the future.
Right.
What do you mean by sustainable?
Well, sustainable in part is financial, because societies, of course, do need a certain amount of income to maintain their staff and provide the services that they have. So all societies are dealing now with, for example, open access publishing, where the federal government in the medical field already has said anything that's funded by the federal government has to be open to everybody. Open access, which means you don't have to pay for the product, the journals, articles that come out. Well, societies, almost all professional societies for a long time, had as part of their income stream the subscription rates for the publication. So when I started my career, I had like 5 subscriptions. I had whole racks of the Journal of Groundwater and GSA Bulletin and Geology and Water Resources Research and Journal of Hydrology. I mean, my whole office was filled with these journals, individual subscriptions. And then it went to a model where universities would buy it, and then everybody who was part of the university gets a free subscription through them. So that changed it out. And now with open access, a lot of societies don't quite know how they're going to handle it, because the funding agencies aren't providing a lot more money to pay for the publication costs, which would be picked up by the authors. So that's a sustainable issue. If we offer our conferences virtually, how can we get sufficient income to be able to do that, to have the platforms, have the staff, hire the companies that put it all upline in the web. And so that's the sustainable thing. All societies need to, just like any company needs a certain level of income. I'm not being mercenary. We're a nonprofit. We're not trying to make a lot of money. but we have to be able to sustain staff to do what we need to do.
How does
So that's what I mean.
GSA finance itself?
It finances it through membership fees, publication fees, conference fees, and through our foundation, which is a separate arm to which people donate money, which is then invested on our behalf. And this supports a number of our programs.
Who is the biggest donor?
And so, boy, I can't really say. I don't know who our biggest donor is. There's people who don't. We have a lot of small donors, kind of like the Bernie Sanders approach in politics, and then we also have some pretty large donors, individuals who've made very good careers for themselves and who found their interaction with GSA was so positive toward their careers that they want to pay back, and much like an alum from a university will pay back. And so these are the kinds of folks that we go to, like any nonprofit organization, and ask if you could support this or support that. Traditionally, some of the oil and gas companies have supported initiatives like field trips and scholarships for field camps and that kind of thing for students.
Don, I would like to go through you quickly on the 5 strategic aspirations of the Geological Society of America, and maybe asking one specific question on each of them. I think that they are very important to the listeners and viewers to understand what are these pillars on which the GSA is founded. The number 1 is advancing scientific discovery, rigor, and integrity. So in here you say that the GSA writes that you try to increase the multidisciplinary nature of the geoscience. How do you reach that goal? Are you advocating maybe to merge departments? How are you gonna force to have this multidisciplinary?
Well, that's a great question. I'm trying personally to try to convince the different disciplines within the divisions of GSA to try to think more in a kind of a multidisciplinary way. It could be done and has been done in the past, in part by having different groups basically underwrite or support, not by financial underwriting, but support and co-organize symposium. And so bringing different groups together in a multidisciplinary way. There's been talk for many years about, do we have too many disciplinary groups? Should we merge some together? But that's always very sensitive, much like in an academic department. It's difficult to force people to interact. It has to come really, in this sense, from the bottom up, that the membership has to understand that this needs to be done, and the role that's the membership, and the role of council and the folks who are running the organizations try to convince them this is for their benefit and the benefit for the society as well.
Dan, are you suggesting that students, instead of being instead of studying specifically so much subdiscipline of geoscience, should be more generalists?
Oh yes. I think that the world is okay. I've been told that, and I've read this, that the millennials will switch jobs, I forget how many times, 10, 12 times in a career, and very often move completely away from what they originally were. I think if people pigeonhole themselves too much into one technique or one little area and don't develop reasonable breadth, that they're going to be lost in the shuffle, because I think that particularly with climate disruption coming down the pipe, that this is going to change out the earth sciences and funding for it in ways that people just can't imagine. And if people are just so narrow that they're working on this one little problem with this particular machine, and they can't either find a way to use their technique to adapt and contribute to these other areas that are very different than what they were trained in, or decide to let the machine go and do something else and have the will to do that, they're going to be left. I'm 100% convinced of this. And it's scary to me how pigeonholed people are these days, and how narrow they've become. Not all. I mean, I'm not. I mean, I know some students who are be much more general, but I see far too narrow training. It's kind of like I always liked. I know you don't work for ExxonMobil, but for a long time, ExxonMobil, based on my students who were hired by them, they'd bring in someone and then they'd put them through this rigorous training through every aspect of the company, and just so they had a breath, and then they'd move them around. And so, and students sometimes would call me, or former students say, "Boy, you don't believe what they're going to have me do. They want me to do this, and I don't know how to do it, but they're going to train me." And now that's ExxonMobil, which is a huge corporation, and they had a terrific system that way. But I think that kind of student, employee, is what's going to be needed. You know, it's what Google does and Amazon does.
Very clear. Don, the second strategic aspiration is supporting early career professionals and students. Mm-hmm. How early is an early career?
We're talking junior faculty. Well, we're talking two kinds. Okay, if it's in academia, junior faculty and, like, say, assistant and associate faculty, as opposed to full professors. And then whatever that equivalent would be in industry. And as far as students, graduate students, and undergraduates as well. And the idea is to support them like we're doing now and enhance this opportunities to do research and to provide them grants to help them with the research, provide mentors. We're developing an extensive mentorship program where they can get different take on what they're doing from what their advisor might be giving them. We're not saying the advisor is wrong, but we're saying they want another person to talk to about where they should be moving, and then to establish connections. We do already have something akin to a job board, but we want to do more of that to try to tie our students in with potential employers, and they really want this. This is one of the things that students keep saying, that they want more opportunities to meet people who really are working out there in the world.
And how much will GSA invest, at least in percentage, in these three categories to help early career professionals or students? Research, education, and professional opportunities.
We're still working that out. I really can't put a number amount on that.
And the other points are, the third one is hosting premier conferences and meetings, and we have largely talked about this now, probably moving into a more virtual world. And number 4 is influencing the geoscience policy and linking geoscience to society. What is for GSA the most pressing earth and environmental challenge that impacts people and society?
Well, from my perspective, and I think most would share it, it's climate disruption that's coming upon us, and also earth science resources. For example, in my presidential address, spoke to this, is that, you know, if we want to go into green energy of any kind, solar and wind, we could start talking about that. And we want to make a difference in the global climate change issue, stop the global disruption, which we probably can't anymore, But if we thought we could do it, we don't have enough rare elements to make the wind farms and the solar farms to make a difference globally. We could, of course, economically make differences regionally and get cheaper energy and so forth, but there just isn't enough neodymium, dysprosium, and iridium, and all that stuff, from what I understand. So there's the challenge of finding more if we want to go that route. And to do that, it would lead to additional environmental challenges if we have to mine it from new areas or take it from the seafloor. There are various possible things. So I think that's a big challenge, and I think we need to have our representatives and senators and our politicians understand that this is a much larger challenge than it's been presented by some parties. The climate disruption itself, I think we need to let politicians know that, this is very, very serious, and they don't understand how serious it is. What happened to Puerto Rico could easily, and what happened to Houston not long ago, could easily happen in a much more recurrent nature on continental United States. And how long can we sustain this kind of disruption, let alone drought in the Southwest and fires in California in the West? And all these are tied to climate disruptions. So I think adaptation is going to be a huge issue. I really do. And so GSA, on the short term, we've been very active in at least seeing what kinds of bills are being introduced in Congress, and the ones that advocate for earth science in various ways. We go on the Hill and speak to congressmen and as on behalf of the society. We're not lobbyists, but we go and say on behalf of society, that you might want to consider voting for these bills, and we've been pretty successful on that. But not just us. I mean, it goes to the American Geological Institute, and AGU is involved, and other societies are all involved together doing this. But we'd like to have more of a presence on this in the future, and because this is, I mean, we saw the pandemic coming years ago. Conceptually, theoretically, it was, if you look at the history way back in the Bush administrations and Obama administrations, there were measures and warnings, and then nothing came out of it. Now, boom, it hits us as if we didn't see it coming, but we did. We just didn't do anything about it until it hit us. I fear this is going to happen with climate disruption. We see it coming, the train's coming, and as society, we're just going to wait until it nails us. And then we suddenly go, oh my gosh, what can we do to stop this? And I think earth scientists have a big role in trying to tell people about this and to try to get action sooner than later.
The very last point of these strategic aspirations written in the strategic plan of the GSA is providing a sense of community and venues for networking. How will you create a sense of belonging to the geological community?
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job already. Again, when we started our strategic plan, we did extensive polling of memberships, and one of the most frequent comments was that they got a sense of community and they felt they belonged to the society, or the society belonged to them. They had a vested interest in it, and we want to continue to foster this. The world has become so fragmented through social media, and there are not many places, I think, around that younger people feel attracted to join and participate and contribute to, at least not a lot of traditional ones. We want to try to make GSA relevant to them in the future, so they'll feel they belong there as a society.
So you mean physically, to go places physically,
and also be part of belonging as part in terms of the community, online community. and we're building that out too as best we can. And these also forge relationships virtually that then can be enhanced once they get together physically to see each other. So I think it's going to be a combination. I don't think the physical will disappear. I hope it doesn't, because I like to drink beer with people. I like to
Not alone.
beer with people. I much prefer that. But I recognize very quickly these past few weeks, and very late, that virtual has its opportunities and benefits. We're having I'm Jewish, and in 2 days is a Passover, and we have a Passover meal called a Seder, and I'm having 30 people to my meal, and they're spread all over the place, and we're going to do it on Zoom, and it's going to be great, because I went to a virtual birthday party where there were 50 people there yesterday, and it was great. It wasn't the same thing, and so I'd call it 70% there, 75%, but it was okay, and some of it was better. One person can only talk at one time. And so you go to a typical party or something, everyone's talking over everybody, Yeah, now you got to listen or you'll be muted.
Yeah, right. Well, Dan, thank you very much. And I would like to leave you the last couple of minutes. If there is something that you still want to say that you didn't have the chance to say, or if you want to, say hello to anybody, or pitch, or shout out, this is a program that is also yours, is part of the community. So for you, the last couple of minutes, Don.
Well, okay. First, I want to thank you, Daniel, for inviting me. This has been a gas. I've really enjoyed this. And I'm going to be listening in on your show from now on. It's really a good thing you're doing for the community, and it's low-keyed enough where I feel very relaxed speaking, and you're a good interviewer. I think it's important that young scientists, whether they're in applied jobs or in academia, join scientific societies, and it could be GSA, it could be AAPG, AGU, you take your pick. And the reason is that you gain a lot for yourself as well as for the profession by contributing. By contributing, I mean you go to conferences, you even offer to volunteer to be a part of the society in some sort of a managerial role, or be on committees. And by doing that, you not only make contacts that will last a lifetime and help you, but you'll also be able to work within the community to help other people as well. And this sense of community, I think, is absolutely critical for a career in the earth sciences. And in particular, because still there's a lot of field work that's done. You get out and you have to, and it's kind of unusual. I suppose in Google you don't have to worry about that. You can do your whole community virtual, but in earth sciences still you're with the earth. You have to go out. The earth is the laboratory. And I just found that in my career profoundly enriching. Being a GSA member made my career. The contacts that ultimately provided my references for tenure and promotion came largely from my connections at GSA. The funding I got often was routed through connections through GSA. I met people at NSF, at GSA. I met people at DOE at GSA. I met my first employer at GSA. It was Amarata Hess, who came to hear me give a talk there. And a lot of people, young people, may not understand that you need to join collectives to get different perspectives and to make the most of your career. And that's to me is something that's very, very important. And I think GSA is a good home. Obviously, I wouldn't be president if I didn't think that would be a good home to start. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Don.
Anyone listening, feel free to send me an email and we can communicate. And you can find me at Syracuse University's website. Just put in Don Siegel, Syracuse, and you'll find me there. or go to GSA's website and you'll find me there. I'm ready to answer any questions and to elaborate further. I'll even talk jazz.
Or cuisine.
Or cuisine, yeah.
And it's really a pleasure to have you here, seeing that you really represent the spirit of the geological community. Thank you, Dan, also for the passion about the technology, the problems that we had, and we're trying to move on to another platform nowadays. So a lot of dynamism going on right now. We're full of energy in the geological community. I see it from you, how you talk, and how you represent the community. So this was another show of Mini Geology. Mini Geology, you can find it in the YouTube channel, minigeology.com. You can write me also at minigeology@gmail.com, proposing who to interview next, or if you want to be interviewed, you listener, you can be interviewed as well. We're all part of a great community, and thank you again, Dan. Bye.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.